Hi folks, Dr. P here, and I'm going to talk about micromanagement in games. In this coronavirus situation, I've been watching more YouTube than I used to, and I was watching a YouTube about a game called War Plan Orange, which is the United States and allies against the Japanese sometime in the late 20s or 30s without the Washington Naval Treaty. And it is a game of massive micromanagement. You give orders to individual airplanes. Yes, sometimes groups of planes, but you can pick out an individual plane and move it. You can pick out an individual squad of troops. You can pick out an individual battery of guns. And so it takes a long time to take a turn, and each turn is a day. So micromanagement run rampant is what this game is. And it may be fun for some people to play, but it's pretty dull to watch. Now, in general, I'm going to say micromanagement is much more practical in a video game like this one than it is in a tabletop game. In a video game, you can stop and come back so that you can take weeks to play a game like that, or even months to play a game like that. You can't do that with tabletop games unless you're playing online, perhaps, or playing by mail. Also, computer people are accustomed to micromanagement in many respects. Some of the more well-known so-called war games on computer, like Hearts of Iron, are resource management games. They're not war games. Because if you manage your resources right, the other side won't have a prayer when you actually fight. So that's not a war game, that's a resource management game, and you spend most of your time managing resources. Now, if you get into enough detail, then to me that becomes tedious. It becomes something where you can screw up, but at least the computer will probably, in many cases, prevent you from contravening the rules. They become tedious. I stopped playing Civilization because there's too much micromanagement. Civilization, a computer game. Now in tabletop games, micromanagement is much less practical because you don't have the computer to keep track of everything. If you're doing all the Pacific theater in a tabletop war game, your turns are probably going to be months, not days. You're not going to control all those little units. In the case of the ships, which of course is the heart of the Pacific War, World War II, you're not going to control individual destroyers or individual submarines, and maybe not individual light cruisers, maybe not even individual heavy cruisers. You may control the individual battleships and aircraft carriers, but that's a relatively small number. What happens when you have too many units to control is you get lost in the trees and you don't see the forest. You lose track of the overall strategies. And yet, the Pacific War and most big wars are determined by the strategies and by economics, not by individual units and where they go. And that's why I would suggest staying away from this. And yet, in tabletop games, we have the monster games where you may have a piece for every U-boat that the Germans had. You may have pieces for regiments in situations where there are a vast number of divisions, and so a vast number of regiments. But that's the way those games go, those monster games. And of course, many people buy monster games for the information, not really to play. But I do see at conventions usually somebody playing monster games. In fact, at WBC, there was a whole room set aside for people to play monster games, although other games were played there as well, and I mean a big room. So the attraction is there for monster games and for micromanagement in games, but to me it misses what's really important about the situation. Thanks for listening.